Fintech Chatter podcast, brought to you by Tier 1 People, the leaders in executive search for fintech ventures.
If you were going to build a bank for the future, what would it look like? I got asked this question to today's guest, Sean O'Malley, CEO of AMP Bank. Welcome to Fintech Chatter, the podcast where I chat to fintech leaders about their secrets to success. I'm Dexter Cousins, your host and the founder of Tier 1 People, the executive search firm trusted by the world's leading fintech brands to find exceptional leadership talent. AMP Bank launched this week, having undergone fundamental transformation with a unique digital bank created for Australia's 2.5 million small and micro business owners. What makes this proposition so unique is AMP Bank is bridging the gap between personal and business banking to support small business owners and make their life easier, not harder. I chat to Sean about the challenges of rebuilding a bank within an established financial institution, plus he shares his experience of partnering with Starling Engine, the platform that is powering AMP Bank. But before I chat to Sean, I've got a huge favour to ask. We don't seek sponsors and keep the show ad-free to give you the most authentic content we can give for free forever. So if you could, please follow and leave a review, or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, and please leave a comment. We take all feedback on board to make the show as best as possible for you. Now, on to today's guest. Sean, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Dexter. Great to be with you.
It's great to be here. The birthplace of Australian fintechs and Stone and Chalk. We're in this building.
We are.
Yeah, launched 10 years ago this year.
Incredible how quickly that's gone.
Well, look, thanks, and you welcome to your Fintech Chatter debut. I guess really intrigued about this chat that we're going to have for many, many reasons. Got some exciting news of the official launch of AMP Bank. So I wondered if you could share with us, before we kind of go into the greater details, just a little bit about what AMP Bank is and what the kind of, I guess, relaunch is about.
Absolutely, yeah, it is delighted. And we are blessed to be here in the sort of birthplace, and I've been at AMP for quite a while now, actually about 11 years, and so I was here when Stone and Chalk kicked off, and AMP obviously a big part of Stone and Chalk. For us in the bank, so we're a 26-year-old bank. Today, our bank is largely an intermediated bank. So mostly what we do today are home loans and deposits. Most of those are originated via mortgage brokers, deposits, a bit of a mix by fixed income brokers and digitally. But what we've been working on for the last 12, 18 months, and what we're about to go to market with in early February, so really close, it's actually a whole new digital offering for really targeting small business, but also for our personal consumers. Really excited to be launching a truly fully digital offering, really out there to help the small end of small business. Make up a huge proportion of Australia. 2.5 million plus businesses in Australia are small businesses. We think there's a gap in that market, so really delighted to be launching that very, very soon.
As a potential customer, I can assure you there's a huge gap in that market. One of the kind of biggest frustrations of my, particularly being in this industry, is my experience of being a retail customer and a small business customer with a bank that's renowned for being great for small business. It's kind of the digital, the whole experience just ain't that great, to be honest.
Absolutely. And look, we've had that feedback over and over from the research we've been doing with small business. I have spent a fair amount of time in a big bank, one of the ones here in Sydney, and had some accountability for small business. And I saw the frustrations from inside that organisation, as well as from knowing a number of people who run their own small businesses. And so it's a frustration that is quite common, and it's a frustration that we think we can help. And we think technology is part of that solution, but we'll talk a bit more. It's not technology only.
Yeah.
Really importantly, it's not technology only that'll really help. We think really help bring this.
I'm empathetic and understand the challenges why my bank and I think other banks struggle with it, but I think they're their challenges, and they're always asking the customers to burden whether that's kind of competing P&Ls or whatever it might be. And I think that's why I'm really interested to talk about the kind of thinking that you've got behind this, because we've seen, particularly in fintech, I think a lot of kind of startups try and solve this problem as well. Yeah. And it's a really difficult one. It's not just the banking part, you've got the accounting part that comes into it as well. Yeah. There's a whole host of different solutions out there. And whilst they're exciting, as a potential customer also get overwhelmed because it's like, not another app, not another thing I've got to integrate. In terms of, I guess, customers that you're aiming at, so you said 2.5 million. Is this what, like mum and dad businesses, tradies?
Yeah, it's mainly, so we're targeting the small end of small business, and so think the solopreneurs, the startup businesses, the side hustlers, the mums and dads, the tradies. Yes, being a purely digital, it's going to be aimed towards businesses that are probably digital themselves, and we know a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, operate their business digitally. So the sort of we'll be there for businesses from sort of 1 to 25 employee sort of sizes is the aim. And importantly, it is one the platform and the service we'll be bringing is all about helping small business owners, but also their personal banking. Yeah. Because we know for nearly all small business owners, their personal banking and their small business requirements are very intertwined. And so for us, we'll be bringing something that helps both small business owners run their small business, but also helps them run their personal banking as well.
I'm really interested in the research that you've done, and look, I'm kind of coming from not selfish purposes, but as somebody who's been involved in the human capital space for well over 25 years now. I've always kind of had an eye on innovation and the impact that would have on the way in which our working lives. And this term, the future of work, I think is a bit nonsense because it's been happening for a long time. And what we're seeing is, I think, particularly with AI, and if I just look at the fintech space, more and more businesses are emphasizing technology as the path to scale rather than hiring people. So I think it's very possible that you could have a 25-person business that's valued at well over $1 billion, and probably we already do, right, in many instances. What has been the kind of research that you've undertaken around how actually we're starting to kind of change the way in which we generate wealth and we generate revenue and income? Because the kind of job for life 20 years with one company isn't really what my kids or your kids are going to experience.
Absolutely. We talk often about how do we help how do we help our people really develop an ongoing thirst and understanding of how you learn? Because the nature of work today, what we did 20 years ago isn't what we did 10 years ago, certainly isn't what we do today or what we'll do in a year or two's time. So I think finding ways to help people continue to learn and evolve is super important. We spend a lot of time internally looking at that. AI is one example, but I don't think it's the only example. For us, the research that we did, when we did a lot of research with businesses to understand what's important, particularly the smaller businesses, but what's important for those smaller businesses. Interestingly, a couple of things you talked about really came through. So one, the nature of their work, but also their customers, is changing really rapidly. And so, that's hard for businesses of all sizes to keep up with. And so, how do I stay on top of what's the latest in AI, or how do I stay on top of what's the latest in, the way to market my business, and where are my customers? How do I use data analytics to identify my customers' needs, etc.? That really came through as a really big need when we did research. The other really interesting thing, and you mentioned about technology, I'm with you. I'm not a technologist, but I know enough about technology over my career to be dangerous and really to be about how do we leverage it to help us run, to help us solve customer problems and run better businesses. We got a lot of feedback. A lot of the research really pointed to people want businesses that are tech first, but actually they're a human set of support. And so particularly for big purchases and for potentially, maybe purchases that people don't make that regularly, there's a great desire to be able to operate digitally, to be able to operate leveraging technology, but to know that there's a human that actually is there to support me in need. And so when we researched specifically for banking, a lot of the research we did said that was a really important feature, that people wanted to know there is a human that I can talk to, that actually it's not only the computer, it's not only the app or the digital interface, but actually there is a person there. So that came through really strongly. The other part that came through really strongly, and I think is a real feature, more and more businesses recognise they need to partner really effectively up and down the value chain to be able to deliver value. Very few businesses are able to meet customers' needs in whatever segment, whatever proposition you've got in totality, and the ability to be able to partner up and down the value chain is super important.
Yeah.
And for us, that's something we're very fixated on. How do we develop that capability to be partner capable, partner friendly, and really leverage partners, not just to deliver services, but truly up and down the value chain.
Yeah. Now you talked about a kind of TAM of approximately 2.5 million small businesses, solopreneurs, etc. I firmly believe in the next decade you're going to see that at least double.
Yeah.
What would be the, I guess, challenges that you would see in terms of onboarding, servicing? We've talked about, hey, you want to have a human at the site at the end of it. My own personal experiences, I think, the challenge for me with my bank is the mission that I have of getting to speak to that person, right? Which, I actually worked out over the course of the calendar year last year between myself and my wife, who's a business partner. We invested 2 business days on hold to our bank about things that weren't our problem, but actually theirs. Yeah,
look, I've got a lot of sympathy and a lot of empathy for exactly that, Dexter. I think that, for us, if I go to maybe the first part of your question a bit about, we see a lot of business startups, but we also see a lot of business failures.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think that's a good thing because you actually need startups and you need failures. All of the literature shows us, all the lived experience shows us that actually, failures aren't failures. Failures are learning opportunities, and then something new will be reborn. But being a service provider in its broadest sense, as a bank is for small businesses, does mean you need to be conscious that you will have a high failure rate.
Yeah.
And so as a business, you need to structure your business model in a way that protects your shareholders and protects your capital and protects, but equally is still a supporter of. And so our aim, that's a balance we need to strike, is how do we support startup businesses? How do we support the growth of those startup businesses, but in a way that isn't that isn't going to destroy shareholder capital, that isn't going to ruin our business, because naturally sustainability is super important for us. We talk about internally, and we talk about wanting to help businesses get started, to survive, because we know the first couple of years are super difficult, and then to thrive. We design solutions and propositions that help those businesses get started, to survive those first couple of years that are really difficult, and then to thrive and grow and really, really succeed. I am with you. I think there will be more and more. We see the business startup, the number of businesses starting up each year actually continues to grow. Yeah. I think we'll see the nature of employment, I'm a big believer, will continue to evolve. Gig workers, we sort of had a boom, it's come off a bit, but I think we'll continue to see more small businesses in all forms being a more common way that people are working, and so we want to be part of that.
Yeah, I think it's been really fascinating for me to see, with this and having recruited through, 3 major, I guess, kind of economic revolutions. So the dot-com crash was the first one I survived. Then the GFC, which was, I was right in the eye of the storm, where my clients were Macquarie, Babcock and Brown, Allco, the international investment banks. And I think to see now this kind of, I don't know, how would I describe like this last 5 years, right? We've had crashes, booms, crash, boom.
Absolutely.
And so it's very much, I don't want to use the term paradigm shift, but certainly I think we're seeing the kind of rapid communication and technology certainly having an impact on the trends now. But what I think's been really fascinating is to see the nature of employment is, for me, is actually gone full circle to when I was in the early, late 90s. Where the clients that I had, they had 60% of their workforce were on temporary contracts, and we're talking like a huge utilities provider, right? And I think with the nature of work from home, the nature of the gig economy, the nature of technology, we're going to see, I think, very much a shift back to independent contractors, temporary workers to make up that workforce, because the very nature of business, as you pointed out, right, keeps changing and evolving.
Absolutely.
And have a static workforce just doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely, and like you, I've seen the sort of ebbs and flows and the periods where there's a huge shift towards permanent employment, permanent workforces, particularly across the banking industry, but across all industries, and then more contractors. I think we'll continue to see that evolve. I also think the actual capacity of our country often is a challenge for us. You know, we often don't have we don't have, you know, we know we've been in very strong employment markets. We've been, you know, full employment or better for a long time in Australia. I think that puts pressure on our capacity of our workforce and the capacity to bring in the talent that we need. Obviously, Australia's looked at immigration to fill skilled immigration, particularly migration, particularly to fill that gaps. I think, you know, we've seen obviously add to that. We've seen sort of cycles of leveraging global workforces versus leveraging only workforces. You know, and obviously COVID had some impacts, as say, on the nature of that work. For me, what all that points to is we're going to continue to see it change. We're going to continue to see anyone who thinks actually what we've got now is what we're going to have in a year's time or 2 years' time, I think is probably wrong. I think we'll see continuing evolution and continuing change in the way that the workforces are composed. I'm a big believer that we will see more gig style work. I think we'll see more of that style work spread into different segments and different parts of our economy than we've seen so far.
Great.
I think there's a little bit of a belief that, you know, that's good for some segments of our economy, but not others. I think if I played forward 5 years, probably or shorter, I think we'll see more of that style work. Yeah. And I think, you know, sort of technology enables that. Our ability to rapidly shift from primarily in office to exclusively remote, identified that you can actually perform work anywhere. And so I think we'll see that continue.
Yeah, I think, and if you look at Australia, right, I mean, one of the things that really I can't get my head around is payroll tax. Why would you tax a business for creating jobs? Yeah, absolutely. So you've got that, and now we've got the right to disconnect. And so everything is weighted against an employer where it's very high risk, you know, increased salaries as well since COVID. So the risks now, as well as the cost, added on top of, you know, we've seen inflation, so we're no longer in ZERP times, so the cost of capital is then to be, right? And so we've got this productivity challenge as well, which is, hey, you know, 5 years ago, you know, 0.1% uplift in productivity would probably see a profit. Yes. Now we got to get a 6% uplift in productivity to get that profit from any capital that we take on.
I absolutely agree, and I think overlay that with we're a Sydney-based business. We've got people all around the country, but we're largely a Sydney-based business. And you overlay the cost of living challenge that's real, and so that for me, whilst I think we certainly think face-to-face is important, and there's lots of benefits about having time in the office. We think flexibility and a hybrid approach is the right approach, and I think we'll see that. I know there are some organisations that I was reading this week, there are some organisations that are moving back towards absolutely fit 5 days in office. I don't subscribe to that. I think that's actually probably a short-sighted response. I think flexibility and hybrid is the way that we'll continue to work. I'm not sure that the balance now, we're probably still a bit too much remote, but I don't think it's entirely in office either. So I think we'll find what the right balance is, but I'm a big believer that balance is super important. And I also really think that across Australia, we've got this real challenge around the cost of living in our big cities. We're a big country, but we hover in our big cities, and the cost of living in our big cities is a really it's a big issue.
I've moved out, and the cost of living is still equally as high up on the Newcastle and the coast as it is, if not higher than it is in Sydney, right? So I think there is a real challenge, but all of these indicators, and I think this is what's kind of really interesting about the proposition that you're creating, is if I look back over this last decade and I look at neobanks, not just here, but also in the UK as well, we've seen some challenges. I think the mistakes that were made here in Australia, perhaps hey, let's create an app and better UX, when actually the big four banks had already done that. So there wasn't really whereas the UK, I think they were a bit behind on digital, whereas here in Australia, I think there's been a real focus on digital ever since the GFC. And then I think the second part of it was very much what you've mentioned, and I'm thinking my friends at 11FS helped NatWest build Metal, 6-7 years back, and a business bank proposition that didn't quite take off. And I think
Perhaps the reason being is that kind of, again, it's this kind of homogenous, let's take what we've done for decades or centuries and put it in an app. What are some of the kind of learnings that you had from, what you'd seen in, kind of previous that you thought, hey, these bits could work, but these bits we need to avoid?
Absolutely, and I think there are a few things there. And to be clear, we're partnering, we're leveraging the tech platform from Engine, which is the backbone of Starling in the UK. We think probably the most successful are those startups in the UK, and so we're leveraging that. But it's much more than technology, and it's much more than the app and the digital front end. I've certainly seen a number of, having been in banking here in Australia for over 20 years, I've certainly seen that boom of fintech sort of startups and the neobanks. What I think is, it's hard to be a bank. It is hard to be a bank. It's hard to be a small bank. It's hard to be a startup bank. At times, it's hard to be a big bank. So it is hard to be a bank, and it is much more than the digital front end or an app or a set of features. We're very clear. I think you're absolutely right. Australian banks have been pretty good digitally for quite a while. Research that shows that we've been pretty good for a while. What became, for us, say a 26-year-old bank that's largely been intermediated, but we've been working on digital capabilities, we needed to really start again. And what we've done in the new division is very deliberately to do a greenfield startup bank, not try to digitise our legacy bank. And as I sort of mentioned, having spent time in big bank here as well, that's really hard. And I think you see that, maybe not in the digital UX, but you see that when you try to do some things that maybe are a little more complex. You see that in the disconnect between channels. You see that in your contact center or your branch not having the same capability the app does. So for us, what we said is there's a real opportunity here to leapfrog what a number in Australia have been working on for a number of years and go to sort of next generation. And next generation for us is digital all the way through. And so it's digital, yes, absolutely, it's digital app and digital front end, but it's actually digital all the way through one tech stack, not the legacy spaghetti that we've all had to deal with. And so that's quite different. What I've seen, though, in going back to sort of fintechs and what I've seen there, so it's really hard to get established as a whole new business. And a number of our fintech and neobanks have been, I think, a little unclear about what part of the market and what part of the problem are they trying to solve. There are a number, that have been, I think, somewhat successful in being able to be niche providers. But I think, the challenge of getting both sides of your balance sheet to be able to find a way to create economic value has been a drawback for a number of our neobanks. If I start with deposits only, and what am I going to do with those funds? If I start with lending and I haven't got deposits, how do I fund my lending? And so, I think the challenges of a startup are real, but they're often about that balance sheet. They're often, for a bank, about how do you get the balance right. For us, what we've looked at is we've got an existing business that if we can start this new greenfield business, targeting small business, really to help small business, we've got a way to create economic value in a combined sense from day one. That's a very different proposition than doing a startup business. So we're trying to balance that startup culture separate from our bank and indeed separate from our broader organisation largely, but with a business model that helps us create economic value from day one.
We talked initially about at the beginning of the interview about this being the birthplace of fintech and Stone and Chalk. AMP were, I think, heavily involved in the space, had a venture fund and pulled out, and that can't help but think that the timing coincided with the Royal Commission, which the point that you made before, I think, particularly neobanks struggling with their value prop. My feeling was they emphasised too much the Royal Commission and tried to get a leg up from that, and it kind of works for a little bit like we see with politicians, right? You can kind of bag the competition, but when you go into power, you got to kind of deliver, and it's a lot harder to build and create something than it is to bag and knock something down.
That's true.
I can't help but think that the kind of Royal Commission was a wasted opportunity to actually really affect change and innovation. And what we then saw was, unfortunately, kind of businesses like AMP, who were all in on supporting the ecosystem, have to retreat and pull out because their funds had to go into fixing some problems, which ironically could have been fixed together by the work that AMP were doing. What's kind of the sense now within the organization as to innovation, and like, how much of a struggle has it been for you kind of internally to push the investment of, hey, look, we're going to start all over again? Because I would imagine that's not an easy conversation to have.
It's not. And I said I've been at AMP now for a bit over 11 years, so I lived through the Royal Commission, and a couple of things. AMP 176-year history, and so the couple of years around the Royal Commission, and then sort of post are a short period of time in what's been a sort of long and storied history of AMP in our country. What we certainly saw, and not just in AMP, but actually right across the industry, is Royal Commission and then reactions from shareholders, from executives, from boards and from regulators saw a lot of discretionary, a lot of investment needing to be directed towards risk and compliance and remediation. All right across the industry had large remediation programs, and they absolutely limited our ability to invest in, frankly, innovation and to invest in more forward-looking. I think all organisations in our industry became very inward-focused, and rightfully so. There were things that needed to be fixed. Thankfully for us, those things are fixed and now well behind us. And so it has seen a return to looking at how do we best solve more customer problems, how do we best grow, and how do we do that through embracing innovation, both internally and with partners. And we'll touch on that a bit more. Has it been tough to make that pivot? Absolutely. It's been something that our executive, myself and my colleagues on the executive committee have talked a lot about. How do we make that transition from internal focus on fixing things to actually more of an external focus, more of a willingness to invest in things, some of which will work and some of which won't. When you're doing remediation and you're fixing problems, it's very clear the problem you've got to solve. And so your tasks and your actions are actually quite clear. It's quite mechanical. Do this and that will happen. And when you're talking about innovation and growth, different story. Need to be willing to try things and let things fail, to learn from those failings and moving on. And so,
I guess you're also betting on a future that doesn't exist.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Kind of, you're hoping it will come into reality, but it's taking a punt, right?
Absolutely. And with differing stakeholders who've got differing appetites for the future, differing stakeholder sets who've got differing views on risk, and so it has been difficult. We're really very I feel very supported by our group CEO Alexis George, but also through our board. The investment we've made in bringing this new digital small business bank to life. For our organisation, it's a big bet, and so that did take a deal of research and a deal of work to convince the board, to convince the executive and the board that this is the right course of action. And I think it's for us, we talk about it's a real indication about AMP returning to focus on customers in the future. Focus on how we help more customers solve more problems, but also how we focus more on the growth of our business into the future.
Want to have a chat now about partners, because if I look at the whole kind of banking as a service premise, where there was a lot of promise of that premise in kind of 2018 through to 2022, and it's died off quite a bit, and we've seen some kind of pretty bad things happen in the US with that model. It has its challenges, and I think kind of, especially when you're working with international businesses, perhaps don't have a presence here in Oz as well. You've got all those time zone challenges, the nuance of the kind of local market and regulators, etc. What have you found have been, I guess, the challenges and the benefits of working with Starling?
Absolutely, and we've been working with a number of partners through the last sort of few years, and we partners of different size and a different scale, and some of that choice of who you partner with is, I think that's actually incredibly important. And so there is a technology fit there's a capability fit, but there's also a culture fit. And so that's a really important feature. That's something we really saw with Starling and with Engine. We're very, and we've been really, really pleased with that. We were very attracted to their approach to technology and their approach in which technology can be used to help solve customer problems and business problems. So very, very much attracted to that. But also the culture. And the culture, if I was to describe it, that it's a very customer-first, customer-centric culture. But more than that, it's actually a whole embedded way of working. And so that attracted us, and we've been pleased seeing that. It is difficult working with international partners. And so, especially for businesses that are used to being entirely domestic. We're a domestic bank, and so we're very used to working, let's say, in Australia. For this particular piece of work we're in this, we've had partner in the UK, partner in Poland, and Australia. And those time zone challenges and those coordination challenges are real, but equally they've helped us, I think, expand our minds on what's possible. So we've had offshore partners for a while, service delivery partners. This more of a strategic partnership. Our approach to that has been very much a strategic partnership, and the cultural alignment on that's important. Shared objectives, shared balanced scorecards, shared measures of success. Really, really important. But also a sort of open, constructive, collaborative, but challenging relationship at its heart. If I compare that to a few other partnerships, I think getting that balance right is super important. I think it's very easy for, let's say, banks, particularly bigger banks, but it's very easy for banks to, think about themselves at the centre of those relationships and not really have a peer-to-peer relationship. We're trying to develop and been pushing really hard to have peer-to-peer relationships. With Engine is one of those, but there are others that we're absolutely, are part of the proposition that we're bringing to market. Some of those that we'll launch with, others that will be fast followers. But that partnership model is super important. And I think that's a real capability. That doesn't come without, deliberate actions, deliberate investments, and fostering that culture and capability.
There's obviously a lot of risk attributed with partnering with technology providers, particularly when you're talking about core banking solutions. And I've seen over the years a number of people approach me just saying, hey, we've got this solution, we're looking to put it in front of banking CEOs, and they're like 2 people. And you think, can I read the room, guys? What have you found in terms of kind of resources, kind of risk mitigation, governance, security? Are there elements that kind of you need to tick those boxes if you're going to work with a fintech kind of solutions provider?
There absolutely is, and you're absolutely right. And I think it's a bit about horses for courses as well. I think as we look, and if I look at our existing partners and the partnerships that we've been working on and that we've had and fallen away, it's a very different proposition depending on what the nature of that is. The core banking system for us is absolutely at the heart of our business. And so, our ability and our willingness to take a real punt, talk to a few smaller organisations thinking about banking as a service and thinking about core platforms, and it's just beyond our risk appetite. We couldn't put the bank at jeopardy. Very different if I'm talking about a service that's a plug-in service that actually I've got multiple alternates to, that if something goes wrong I can plug this out and plug and substitute. And so I do think that the nature of the service is really important. As a bank, that's a really important consideration for us. Obviously, we need to be thinking about what if the worst happens, and how do we protect ourselves and our customers if the worst happens for a partner. And so, we've got, as you'd expect, the sort of the contractual and resilience type arrangements in place for that. But we don't want that to ever happen, because probably the bigger risk for us is actually a brand risk. As a big brand in this market, whilst our bank actually is not as well known as our brand overall.
CBA system goes down for an hour and it's made the news for months, right?
Absolutely. For us as a 175, 176-year-old business, the brand reputation issue and impact is as real and probably more impactful than the technology risk. And so, that again goes to the nature of the service is really important. And so as we think about where we will partner, who will partner with, what we won't partner for, that reputation is really paramount in our thinking. And again, that goes to the cultural aspect of the alignment. I see a lot of really good technology put on my desk to say, have a look at this. The culture, the underlying resilience are super important considerations as we think about what will that mean if things go well, but equally, what will that mean if things don't go well?
Yeah.
And so brand and reputation risk is a really important consideration for us.
You've brought in a fair amount of talent that's come from the fintech space. I remember when Bank acquired 86400 and having a conversation with some of the execs there who were clients at the time and saying, hey, have you really got the appetite to try and mix oil with water? And the only way you can mix oil with water is you need an emulsifier and you need to shake the hell out of it. And so I think kind of that analogy was enough for them to say, I don't think I've got the energy to kind of shake that much. I don't know if I'm the emulsifying agent, right? So how have you found kind of bringing people in to, an environment where you're kind of moving fast? It's, I wouldn't say move fast and break things, because within fintech, you've always got the guide rails of regulation. But you do have, a very different environment where there's a lot more kind of hurdles to get through. Decisions are slower. It kind of takes time to get things through. People moving from large corporates into fintech startups, about 90% of them leave within the first 6 months because it's just too different an environment. And I haven't really done any studies on people moving the other way, and I was really curious to understand how you've seen people make that transition and what are some of the qualities that you look for when you're bringing people in.
Absolutely. And Dexter, it's a critical, I've talked about partnering and choice of partners. I think, talent selection and retention actually is our most critical item. It's a thing I think about and probably spend most of my time thinking about. And we are being very deliberate about hiring and have brought in people with varied experiences, but it is real. There is a shock if you've spent your entire career in fintech or in small business and then you're put into a big business. We're not really a big business, but it is different, and there are that come with that. So, what are we trying to do? We're definitely incubating this business a bit in cotton wool, a bit to the side, but we haven't gone as far as going to a garage in Redfern. So we're not that step, although I know for a number of businesses that works, and it's a really great step. We're doing a startup feel business within the bank, within a big organisation, but we're being very deliberate about there are things that are different in our startup division than our existing bank and indeed the organisation. And we're bringing in people who've got experience of what agile ways of working fast, more startup cultures look like and feel like. And we're trying to balance that with some people who do have some experience working in bigger organisations. So that balance is really important, and we're trying to get the balance, right. I'm sure there'll be somewhere where we get it wrong, but we're trying to get the balance right. Then I'm doing a lot of work, and indeed, when people ask me what's your biggest risk about your new division and the new bank working, I actually think it's about not changing enough from the bank and the business that we are today. And that's with the greatest respect to the bank and the business that we are today, but we need to be different. And so I spend a lot of my time dealing with my colleagues and my internal stakeholders on how this is different, and having the right sort of space and room for this to be different. Businesses have an inertia about them that suck new things towards the existing. We're spending a lot of time trying to ensure that the new is given some space to be new. And so having the right people who've lived through that is super important. Having people who have spent time in organisations of different sizes, small and medium and large, is very helpful, and that's really been what we've been looking for. We've been looking for people who have spent some time in businesses of different sizes. We also brought on some fantastic people who've actually run their own business. I think for a business trying to serve small business, that's really important too, that you actually have some people who've got a lived experience about what being a small business owner is. So I was talking, we've just onboarded our first group of contact centre, customer service people, and none of those are from a bank. They're all from different industries, and a couple of them run their own small business. And so we're trying to bring in different talent, trying to bring in people with different experiences. And then, the biggest thing I'm trying to do is not let the inertia and in some ways bureaucracy of bigger business, really curtail the new business. And indeed, what we're trying to do is build a new, the flag on the hill. The new business is the way we want the whole organisation to work. And so we're trying to, create a different culture and a different speed of operation that actually becomes the new way the whole AMP will work.
Yeah, it is. You just touched on there what I think is a real challenge for anybody in your role, and anybody trying to affect change and innovation within an established organisation. Plenty of people in my network who've been in those roles have kind of reached a level of burnout at some point because you kind of just can't keep pushing hard and meeting resistance, and something has to break at some point. How do you manage that kind of stress and what can be fairly kind of draining energy-wise? You can put all that effort in and then a decision gets made of, the board's decided we're not going to go in that direction now. You got to communicate that to your people, and you feel like, oh God, I've let them down. They're not going. I've got no credibility with them now. Where's the trust gone? And all of that really is kind of energy draining. How do you keep yourself energetic, focused, overcome those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a real challenge. That's an absolute challenge. It comes with the role, I think. And so, I'm lucky I am more optimistic than pessimistic. Some people say actually maybe a little bit too much, but more optimistic than pessimistic is my natural bias. I think I do feel a real strong accountability for my people. That's something that for me is a super important part of leadership. I do feel accountable for my people and for helping my people grow and succeed. And so that aspect is super important to me. I think finding personal ways to develop and enhance that resilience is super important, and I think about earlier in my career, some of those setbacks, and I had them in big organisations as well in smaller organisations. Some of those setbacks are challenging to overcome, but finding ways to build and then sustain that resilience is important. I think what you do with yourself outside of your corporate life is super important in whatever way that is, whatever ways outside of the office or whatever that means for your personal health, whatever that means in family. But for me, those things are really important. That balance is super important. Having outlets outside of this is important. But this is a big part of our life. And so recognising, I was lucky enough, I worked for a while with Gail Kelly when she was CEO of Westpac, fantastic leader. And, Gail often talked about work-life balance for her. This differentiation between work and life didn't make sense. And I remember as a younger exec, I'm trying to understand more about what that meant. But actually, work-life balance, it's all work, it's all life. And how work fits into that life, that's a sort of culture that that sort of belief system that I use about how does it fit into your life. But it's not like there's work and then there's life and they're separate. They're actually very intertwined. But for me, that is absolutely about finding, having those continual ways outside of work. I think it's also about people, in a peers, leader outside of organisation who can help when those things get really tough as well. So the mentors, the coaches, but also the team environment that help, because we all go through that. We all go through ups and downs. There are times when things are great. There are times when things are tough. And ensuring that we've got ways to talk about that openly and get support from people, I think is really important.
I love that bit about work-life balance, and we've kind of tried to muck around with the term and say, it's work-life integration. But I think it's something that's much deeper than that. And if I look at the levels of unfulfillment, and also I think, we kind of talked earlier about the nature of work. I think one of the things that people really have to start to take accountability for is their own fulfillment and their own development, and stop outsourcing that to an employer. And I think the kind of reality is it's our responsibility to find within our work that creative outlet, or that that helps us express who we are as people. The people that I've met that I think have really gone far in their careers, they've found that it's not just one thing, right? It's lots of things. And whether it's a founder or it's an exec of a bank, I think what they've found, hey, these are the things that really give me energy, that I know I'm really great at, and the other stuff that I'm not so good at, I can either delegate, or I'm going to kind of find a system or process that I can crunch through that work, but it's not going to drain all of my energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of secret, I think, to getting that kind of fulfillment piece and the work-life balance.
I completely agree with you on a couple of those things. I think, we often say, sometimes we can get stuck in organisations or in roles where we say, this, we know this is not actually the right role, this is not the right organisation, but people stay there.
Yeah.
And, I've counselled and coached as many people to say, actually, it's time for a change.
Yeah.
It's time. It's going to be better for you.
They try to change the culture and the environment rather than just getting out of the environment and finding the right one.
I think sometimes you've got to be pragmatic about what you can do and be really clear about maybe what you can't. For me, I'm a goal chaser, so I love sticking a flag on the hill and then using that as a rallying cry. And it's got to be a big flag and it's got to be on a big hill. Yeah. And if it's not a big flag on a big hill, then for me that's less enticing and it's less motivating. It does mean you might not get there, but you're going to get a whole heap further than if you set small, small goals. And I certainly think the other thing I think is absolutely right. All of us have to take our own personal accountability for our development. Yeah. And if especially now, the nature of work is changing, the nature of technology is changing, the nature of our markets are changing, and if you're standing still, you're going backwards.
Yeah.
And so each of us has a personal accountability, I think, to be continually curious, continually looking for how do I develop? What are the things that I need to be working on? What are the things that actually were good for me 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago, but those aren't the things that are going to help me in a year's time or 2 years' time. So I'm absolutely a huge believer in that. It's our personal accountability. Organisations often help. And you just have to look around the resources that organisations provide often to help, especially larger ones. But equally, there are so many ways in which we can all contribute to our development, but we've got to take that personal account.
It's one of the 5 criteria that we look for when we're assessing talent, is that propensity to learn.
Yes.
And I think it's a critical skill now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd certainly agree. That one, and we're talking, I mentioned that word, we're talking about a lot. It's a characteristic I've always been enamoured with, but a characteristic of curiosity.
Yeah.
And we're looking for people who are curious. And that curiosity trait, I think, is a real indicator of performance.
Well, Sean, it's been fantastic to chat. We're coming up to a wrap, but before we do, what can we expect from AMP Bank in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we are very close to launching our new digital proposition for small and personal banking. I'm super excited for that, but that's only the beginning. So what we'll launch with in February is only the beginning. What you can expect from us is a continuation of new propositions, of new capabilities. But also, and I think really exciting, we'll be looking for new people to join us on that crusade. We'll also be looking for new partners to join us as we build that out. So it's going to be a year for us of rapid delivery. I feel like I've been talking about this now for long enough, and I'm really excited to get it out there in the public and then really build and evolve that.
Brilliant. We get some amazing talent listening to this show. If anybody's interested in finding out more about careers at AMP Bank, where's the best place for them to go? Yeah, so check us out on amp.com.au. There's a dedicated careers people tab there. Whole new website actually just went live, so amp.com.au. Check us out and check out under talent. Now you also get a load of founders who could be building propositions or have propositions that could be the ideal partner for you. Absolutely. How would they reach out or connect with you? Yep, so I get a lot of offers through LinkedIn, and so reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn, and then we'll put you in touch with the right people. Brilliant. Thanks for joining me, Sean. Pleasure. Thanks, Dexter. As always, folks, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you're coming back, thanks so much for your support. And if you're new to the show, make sure you give us a follow and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube and if you're listening on audio, make sure to follow us so you get updated on all the latest episodes. Until the next show, keep well.